So there we go, that's lovely. So without further ado, we can get started. Normally at this point I would hand over to another speaker, but I do have a couple of things that I guess I'd like to say before we move on to our actual speakers. And basically what I'm just going to do now is to give you a very brief introduction to data maturity. I'm obviously very keen to hand over to both Matt and Shona, because they've got a lot more to offer you in terms of tangible experience around data maturity. But I did just want to set the scene a little to give you a high level introduction to the, as it says there, to the what, why and how of data maturity. So what is it? As it says there, an organisation's data maturity essentially refers to the extent to which that organisation is capable and ready to make the best use of their data. Why is this important? Well, obviously our speakers are going to talk about this, and it's very much the crux of today's webinar. But just as a starter for 10, understanding how mature your organisation is, and that is how well your organisation manages and uses data, will provide you the information that you need to improve, to become more data mature. It will allow you to understand your areas of strength and your areas of weakness, both across the organisation and across many different aspects of data and data use, data management as well. You know, for example, leadership, data management, data quality, data skills, etc. So it's kind of a very broad ranging assessment of how well you do with your data. And obviously, the information that you would gain through a data maturity assessment will allow you to will hopefully also allow you to start addressing some of those areas where there is room for improvement. So that's a very high level introduction to the kind of what's and whys. The how, I haven't put anything on the screen, and that's because the answer is really, well, it depends. There are quite a few different assessment tools and frameworks that are available, and different ways in which you can undertake an assessment. Most, if not all of them, take a self-assessment type approach, where a range of people across your organisation are asked a series of questions, and the information from those questions is brought together and analysed, and then that allows you to identify where your strengths and weaknesses are. But today's session isn't really about the how, as I've said already. That may actually come later, and I'll come on to talk about that after both Matt and Shona have spoken. I'll talk about, you know, what this might mean for Wales and where we might be going, or where we'd like to be going. But for today's session, it is all about focusing on the why, on the benefits of understanding how mature you are in managing and using your data. And this, as I said earlier, is what our two speakers today are going to talk about. So first up, we have Dr. Matt Thompson from, as I said, from the UK Health Security Agency. Matt has a fairly unique perspective on data maturity. Until recently, he worked for the UK Government Data Quality Hub and actually led the development of the data maturity framework for the new data maturity assessment for government. So you may all be aware that the UK government have just released their framework, and Matt was very heavily involved in developing that. And then in January of this year, he became head of data strategy at the UK Health Security Agency, where he is actually now rolling out the assessment he helped to develop. So it's a very unique approach to, or perspective on data maturity. And then Matt will hand over to Shona Nicol, who is head of technical data policy at the Scottish Government. Shona is leading the data maturity project that Scottish Government is running, which each year aims to help a cohort of both national and local government understand where they are with their maturity data currently, the outcomes they want to achieve, and the areas of improvement. And so on that note, I'm going to hand over to Matt. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you so much, Suzanne. So through the magic of Teams, hopefully we'll be swapping slideshows over now. And lovely. So thank you for that, Suzanne. Lovely introduction, and thank you to Data Comedy for inviting me, and thanks to everyone here for coming to listen about data maturity. So as Suzanne said, I have been working data maturity for some time now, hugely passionate about it, and have a bit of a unique perspective, having been on both sides of creating a model and now using a model. So firstly, just to build on what Suzanne talked about of what is it and why should you care? As we said, really, data maturity is all about getting an understanding of the degree to which you as an organization are ready to make the best use of your data. And that spans all sorts of pieces, not from just using the data, but also all the way back to how you manage it, how you govern it, how you get it in the first place, how you plan that whole process to actually get the best out of the data that you have. And that particularly manifests in terms of how well the data you have and the way you're able to use it is actually enabling your strategic objectives as an organization. Are you able to deliver on what you need to deliver, the services, the products that you need to create for your citizens, but also the risks that are being created to your delivery by problems in your data practices? And really, I tend to break sort of data maturity down into three extremely broad areas of people, processes, and technology. And if there's a word for technology or systems that begins with P, please tell me, because I'd love to make that a much neater little package. But data maturity is not just about, do you have the tools and the systems to do what you need to do? It's not just about, have you got the mechanical policies and processes in place to sort of hold it all together? And it's not just about, do you have the right people? All of these need to come together so that you have people with the right skills, the right attitudes, the right understanding, and the right investment in data, and also the right ways of working and the right systems to actually enable all of that to happen in a smooth and efficient way. And why it's important then really, obviously using data maturity to understand your strengths and your challenges. And I particularly point out finding your strengths here because, particularly as data professionals, we're often guilty of being very, very good at complaining about the things that are wrong. We're keenly aware of our challenges and our weaknesses. And we need to spend a bit more time, I think, just celebrating what we're good at, particularly during the development of the government data maturity assessment. Every organization I talk to, it tends to stump them a little bit when I asked, okay, tell me what your strengths are. Because we don't necessarily think about it enough and we don't celebrate it enough, but it's a really important part of communicating the value of your organization, and finding areas to build on and exemplar practices to spread more widely as well. So the other reason why data maturity is really useful then is that it gives you an evidence-based approach to deciding how you're going to focus your improvements in your data practices, and also how you're going to prioritize what you need to change, particularly in terms of, as I said earlier, mitigating the risks that are being posed to your actual organizational objectives, your actual operational delivery. So it's a big process. It is a broad concept, but also it is an extremely useful way to really demonstrate what is it we're good at, what is it we're struggling with, how are we going to bridge the gap to make sure that we're able to actually deliver the things that we need to deliver. So we're not going to get too much into how, but it's often perhaps sometimes seems a little overwhelming figuring out where on earth we're going to start. You know, how do we know that we're ready? How do we get everyone bought into this idea? How do we decide if we're doing the whole organization or a bit of the organization or the whole assessment or just looking at a certain aspect of our data maturity first? But none of that should be a barrier to beginning the conversation, because actually just beginning the conversation in itself starts to bring value. That communication, understanding what are the right channels to start talking about data, thinking about how are we going to actually use the results that we get from the data maturity assessment, can really start to build momentum around what data means in your organization. And throughout, I'm going to bring it up again, development of the government data maturity assessment, it was a very, very common theme that actually just starting the conversation pushes data right up the agenda. And that is a massive, massive win and a massive reason why data maturity is a really useful approach to getting a picture of where you're at and what you need to do. So it's an old trope, but sometimes it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. But equally, I do think we need to talk about both, because it's sometimes quite difficult to get people excited about a journey if there's not an interesting destination at the end of it. If you've ever tried to get someone to go on you with a journey, if you don't tell them where you're going, they tend to be a little bit suspicious and not too invested, in my experience. So there's sort of two sides to the value you can get out of a data maturity assessment. So the destination, obviously, as we said, it is about, you can show your strengths, you can find your challenges. Most data maturity assessments will generate numerical scores, which makes it easy to communicate kind of what you need to other people in the organization. And often these maturity assessments will also support you into turning those scores, those strengths, those weaknesses into an action plan to actually figure out what you need to do, how you're going to do it, when you need to do it by, the resources you need to put into that in order, again, to mitigate those risks to your actual operational delivery. But the journey of the data maturity assessment as well, it feels like a substantial undertaking. As I said, it can feel overwhelming, but actually just the process of going through that assessment can bring you a huge amount of value, even if you don't necessarily reach the massive destination that you hope. The beginning of that journey helps you to build the networks across your organization, identify the people in your organization who are important to your data ecosystem, start building those connections, and start bringing those people together. As I said earlier, it also really helps to put data on the agenda. It's quite a big piece of work sometimes, but it also means that you're starting the conversations so that the organization is thinking about data from top to bottom. And most good data maturity assessments really involve a wide range of people so that you can get that piece and really, really make sure that data is embedded into the general conversation of what is it we do as an organization. And finally, something that has been a really useful for my own organization, but also many other organizations doing these data maturity work, is that it lets you see past the boundaries of the natural silos that we tend to fall into, and almost breaking down the walls between different business areas, because it's very common that different areas are so busy doing their own thing and trying to deliver their objective that actually we don't necessarily see how much what we're doing is impacting on other areas of the business. And also we don't get the chance to see how we can benefit from better collaboration. So doing this data maturity assessment and putting data on the agenda, starting those conversations, building those connections and those networks really, really helps you to bring down the walls a little bit, start improving collaboration, start understanding better how you can work more efficiently and more effectively just by being a bit more connected and joined up in the way that you work with your data. So there are lots of different ways that you can do this. We won't go into detail on them, but that may well be a future session for you, which will be very interesting. But as Suzanne said, I worked on developing the data maturity assessment for government, which I'm now applying in UKHSA. And this is an example of a very broad and very deep assessment with lots of different topics of data, so that you really can use a data maturity assessment to get a very rich picture of every single aspect and every single capability of the way you're working with data. This particular model also cross-cuts those topics around data with some sort of thematic lenses. So you can also think about actually, how's our data culture developing? Do we have the skills we need? How engaged are the leadership with data? So again, lots of different ways to pull together a data maturity assessment, and lots of different ways that you can slice it up into according to what your organization's needs are. But a huge value to be gained by really kind of focusing in on different areas so that you have a much clearer picture of where we're good and where we're struggling. Now, particularly the government model was developed, if anyone has seen the National Data Strategy from a few years ago. It was a major commitment for the government to get a picture of the data maturity of UK central government. And so we decided to make a maturity model for that purpose. For a few reasons. There are lots of different models already out there, lots of fantastic models, lots of really useful models. But one of the key drivers, particularly for government, was that there wasn't a model that quite captured the nuance and complexity of all the different ways of being to the level that we wanted. But Shona's going to be talking about hopefully a model that's working really well for them, and that was in fact the model that we used as the basis for the government data maturity assessment. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter which method you use necessarily. They all can bring huge value just by doing the assessment, but also by being clear about the goals you want to achieve from it, the benefits you can gain from it, and the kind of communicating that with your colleagues can really just bring a huge amount of success and a huge amount of development. And as I said before, putting data right at the heart of the conversation, so that everything else gets framed in terms of actually, is the data we need in place to do the operational delivery. So finally then, briefly about how we're doing this at UKHSA. So this is a strategic commitment for us to understand our current level of data maturity. Our data strategy, which will be launching after the summer, commits us to getting a really rich and coherent view of the current level of data maturity across the entire agency. And that will really help us with having more coordination and more consistency in the way that we plan our data improvements. Also, particularly around having a single picture of the agency helps to prevent some of that kind of duplication that you get, or that splintering that you get, so that we can bring together the portfolio of various different data projects by having that understanding of everything that needs to happen on a more macro scale. So we've chosen to use the model we have simply because it gives a very robust and quite broad and deep view. It's a very reproducible assessment, as it's being cared for by a fantastic team in Cabinet Office, who will make sure that in multiple years' time, we're still able to reuse the same processes with a way of mapping that back to where we were and understanding our progress over time. It's also really important as how we align and sort of position ourselves in the wider government landscape, and that's a fantastic reason why cohort style things actually work really well. Unfortunately, UK government isn't necessarily doing a tight cohort approach, but the fact that there are multiple organisations, both similar and very dissimilar to us, using the same model and the same fundamental approach, makes it much easier for us to kind of collaborate and partner with other public sector bodies, so we can kind of share learnings, we can grow together, and just have a more singular defined language and approach and understanding of data when we need to work and partner with other organizations. So I'm very happy to pick up conversations with anyone in the room. You can get in touch with me and my team at datastrategy@ukhsa.gov.uk, but I also look forward to your questions at the end of the session. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Shona.
Thanks very much, Matt. And I'm just going to share my slides, and hopefully you'll be able to see them in a second. Okay, I'm hoping that everyone can see those slides okay. Well, yeah, thanks very much, Matt. And in some ways, I'm going to talk a little similar type of things that you've heard from Matt already. But I'm actually going to talk about a data maturity cohort that we've been running within my team in Scottish Government for the last few years, and maybe just give you a little bit of information about the kind of the lessons that we've learned from it, the findings that we've been able to take away. So just to take a step back, my name's Shona Nichol. I head up the technical data policy team in Scottish Government. That team, very badly named team, but we cover everything from data maturity, data standards, open data and data innovation. And I think the concept behind us doing this cohort approach was when we were looking at things like data standards and open data in the public sector in Scotland, we saw lots of commonalities. We were all facing the same set of challenges, and we thought like taking a sort of cohort approach to this would help us share amongst the different organisations things maybe that we were all doing differently, that we're working in different areas. So that was kind of the kind of background to all of this. Just get on to the next slide. Yeah, so I'm going to just talk a little bit about the approach that we've taken. So we, as I said, we decided to do this data maturity kind of cohort, and I guess this data maturity project is a bit like a learning by doing, right? We didn't really know what we were going to find out when we started it. We've had 2 cohorts so far. We had the first cohort a couple of years ago, and then cohort 2 was last year and just finished earlier on this year. We've got a 3rd cohort that's coming along in September this year. So far we've had 17 public sector organisations involved in the first 2 cohorts. We had a pilot before that as well that had another 5 or 6 organisations involved. For the next cohort, we've actually got quite a lot of interest, so we're now trying to think about how we scale this up a little bit. But I guess just to sort of give you a little bit of a feel for what we were trying to achieve with this project. So the first bit of it, I guess, is that we would support that cohort public sector organisations. And I should say here, when we're saying public sector, this covers local authority, central government. We've had some health and social care organisations as well involved. So it's quite a broad spectrum when we're talking about that public sector. So first of all, we wanted to help them define their own ambition for data. And again, this comes back to a lot of what Matt was saying. So you want to make sure that that ambition is really supporting your organisational sort of strategic goals, and maybe to stop organisations thinking that data is this separate little thing that they do separately, but actually, it can underpin those bigger strategic goals of your organisation. We then wanted them to undertake some research and engagement, and the data maturity assessment is part of that research and engagement. But we also try and get organisations to run little workshops and interviews alongside the assessments, because this research and engagement stage is really a key sort of way of raising awareness of data across your organisation. So think about it as a way to get start that conversation on data as well. And the assessments are great for doing that, but there's lots of other things you can do as well. And then it's starting to develop a plan. So what are you going to do now that you've you know what your ambition is? You've taken you've undertaken some research. What are the actions now that you're going to have to take? And what we've been trying to do as part of this project is help people to write outcomes-based action plans. So really think about the outcomes as opposed to the activities that maybe you as an individual team or data team within an organisation are trying to do. So, that's what we try and get people to do in 6 months. The last bit there about taking that first step in implementation, that doesn't always happen in 6 months. It's actually, believe it or not, 6 months passes very quickly when you're doing all of these things. So that was kind of the what support we would provide to organisations taking part. But what we got in Scottish Government through this whole process is that we got some learnings and understanding of the challenges that the public sector are facing around data. And we can use that then to help us develop some key elements of what we're calling the data transformation framework. And I'm just going to tell you what that is as well. So I guess the data transformation for us, or the data transformation framework, is really that sort of process that organisations have to go through to improve their data maturity, and the kind of steps that the organisations need to take to achieve some of their their strategic goals with data. And the framework, I guess, is being co-developed through projects like this, with the aim of helping organisations get a bit of an understanding about maybe where they they currently are in terms of data maturity, how they can improve that, how they get more value from their data. And basically, to me, I think it's a big program of changing the way the organizations think about data and the way that they value their data assets as well. And I guess we're trying to do, set out what we think good data looks like, and then the way that organizations can, can make those improvements. And I guess that we've got long-term things that we're trying to achieve with this framework, so that organizations in Scotland become more evident, there's more evidence-led decisions. So more mature organizations will make better decisions. And that might include, benefits might be better service delivery, increased efficiency, that kind of thing. That there's greater transparency, so that good data sort of supports that transparent and accountable reporting back to stakeholders like citizens, your elected officials, and so on. That there's more innovation, so that we as the public sector are using data in new ways to develop new services and process, make better use of new technologies, AI, all of that kind of thing. And also that can enable innovation in the third sector and private sectors as well, and that improved collaboration as well. So it can sort of strengthen the way that we work together as public sector organisations, all of which we're hoping will improve, sort of the way that our citizens have their services delivered to them, and helps us think about any new challenges that are coming into Scotland. We've got the kind of data there to deal with them all as well. And I think it's worth thinking every organisation's kind of journey towards that data improvement or data transformation is pretty unique, and really affected by the kind of the characteristics of that organisation. So that might be things like leadership, the capacity that it has, how mature they are as an organisation as well. But I think what we're finding is, regardless of that, there are sort of foundational things that are fundamental to that kind of transformation journey in every organisation. And this is not our idea. We stole it from the Australian government. So this is some work that they've done on something called the Foundational Four. And what we're seeing is that Foundational Four are like the basis for any maturity improvement or transformational, data transformation journey that organisations are going through. So those 4 foundational practices are kind of leadership. So do you have somebody who's responsible for data in your organisation? Then there's the asset discovery. So do you know what all your data assets are? Data governance. So do you have processes in place to oversee the way that your data is managed within your organisation? And then finally, that strategic side. So do you have a clear plan and ambition around data? And what we're learning from those last 2 cohorts is helping us sort of develop these 4 different areas. And actually, the cohort really is all about developing that strategy foundation, right? So although we're talking about data maturity assessments, that is just a means to help you develop a plan for what you're going to do in your organisation around data. Now, sitting under these foundational 4, we've got a whole set of different pillars. So that's things like data standards, data ethics, skilled workforce, innovation, technology. And all of these are really important as well, but I think this is what we're trying to say, is these are the 4 to start with. But going back to the data maturity cohort, as I said before, the data maturity assessment is a really fundamental part of that 6-month project. And I guess why it's good to do an assessment. I mean, we've already heard Matt talk a little bit about this, but data in your organisation is just spread throughout it, and it can be really complex and overwhelming to think about what you have to do at an organisational level to improve your maturity. And doing an assessment is really a great sort of starting point to help you identify the specific needs and priorities that your organisation might have, and maybe even across a data ecosystem as well. So it's not just about your individual organisation, but perhaps what we're seeing across that wider public sector. And I think this doing an assessment across your entire workforce has got lots and lots of benefits, all of which we've maybe spoken a little bit about already. But it gives you a kind of perspective on your organisation's current data maturity levels. It lets you identify the kind of strengths and areas for improvement. If you're including all your staff members, it allows you to capture a really wide range of perspectives. And that might be from people who you don't necessarily consider themselves to be data or involved in data. So it can give you that different set of perspectives. And really usefully, I think at the cohorts, what we're seeing is it allows organisations to identify the inconsistencies in the way that data is used, or the awareness of data between different teams or departments within their organisation. As Matt said, lots and lots of different survey options exist. We use one called Data Orchard. And that's what we used in the cohort. You can see the little picture here. So it's got sort of 7 key themes and 5 different levels. There were lots of reasons we picked this one. I think the main one, well, Matt hadn't actually finished the UK government one at this point in time when we started our cohorts. And it was online, which means that it made it a lot easier for people to be able to answer. It's they got a little link and then they could fill the survey in online as well. But I think it's always really important to remember that this is, it's not an external objective assessment of your organisation. It's what your staff think about data within your organisation, and that can be really incredibly valuable. But it's also worth noting that what we find from the cohorts is for big, large organisations, you're not going to get a massive response rate. So there's stuff that you need to think about before you even start assessments. So in the first cohort, we dived straight into assessments and we found that response level was really low. For the second cohort, we made them do a lot more work to get buy-in, to sort of do comms around, and that that did help with the response rate as well. But don't expect that you're going to get a full cut. You're going to get lots of people in your organisation doing these surveys. And then I guess some other lessons that we've kind of learned from the cohort. I guess the first is the assessments are can be much more valuable than simply the score. So it gives people an opportunity to engage with others in their organisation around data. And I guess in the cohort, there were some differences of an opinion in different organisations about whether they were going to go out to their full organisation with the survey or whether we're going to go for very specific areas. So like for local authorities, for example, some of them went for specific service and used that as a pilot that they could then sort of scale up afterwards. So there's lots of different ways that you can sort of do that assessment, but it is a great way to start that conversation around data. Getting buy-in is super important. Don't jump straight into doing the assessment without doing a little bit of work beforehand. Getting some leadership support for the assessment. But also getting other experts, so that might be comms teams and others, to help you help you prepare, I guess, for doing the assessment. And as part of that, it's worth thinking about creating a bit of a support network. So I mentioned before that getting those diverse sort of views is really, really helpful. But do the same when you're planning or when you're looking at how you the results that you're going to get from the assessments as well. So creating that support network or creating a little team that you can use to help you either run the assessment or look at the results is really important as well. And I guess depending on the size of your organisation, that sort of support network could be lots of different things. And again, we saw this in all of the cohorts. So for some, it was a little core team. That had that were there to sort of make sure that the rollout went smoothly, and then that core team then kind of planned and designed what their action plan was going to look like. You could have an advisory group that's going to have that diverse range of opinions from across your organisation. It could be a senior leadership group that maybe exists already, and there, you can sort of repurpose them to oversee and support the development, to do the assessment and the development of your plan as well. So there's lots of things to think about, to get in place before maybe you even start doing an assessment. The next thing is that the scores themselves might be sort of less helpful than you can imagine. I mean, this is just partly to do with it's a self-assessment. And some people will go, well, I can do everything I want to do, so I'm going to give myself, we're going to have a high score here. And that's because they don't necessarily know what they could be doing with data. And so again, what we've found from the cohorts is focus on the spread rather than the score. So look at that spread across the different teams in your organisation, and look at packets, where there's pockets of good practice, and maybe areas where they need a little bit of help. But I would also say, don't rely solely on the survey data to tell you what to do. I think, again, in the cohorts, some of them found it, you get so much information back that it can feel quite overwhelming about where do you start? Like, what, you've got all of this information, and how are you going to sort of pull this together into some kind of structured plan? And where do you start? What are your priorities? So we also suggested that people, alongside that survey, they do workshops, and sort of to triangulate, I guess, what they're finding in the survey. And we actually developed a little mini assessment tool to help with that as well, which has been quite useful, and it's a good conversational starter as well. And then, so that's kind of lessons learned, I guess. But what were the findings? So we've had two lots of cohorts. We've had 17 organisations. I think in total we've had about 2,000 people complete this assessment. And I guess what I've been doing is using it maybe just as a little bit of a kind of primary indicator as the current status of data maturity in the Scottish public sector. I mean, we need to keep validating these findings, but it's a good first picture of what does maturity look like across Scotland. So the first graph is really just showing you that the scores, are an average. You can see the range of scores by respondent in that first graph there. And just shows you the sort of the disparity or lack of consensus in opinion on some of the data maturity assessments, which is quite interesting. And again, think about targeting where are the pockets of good practice and where are the bits that need a bit more help. The second graph was a really interesting one as well. So as part of the assessment, we asked people to kind of pick a persona that they might identify with. And what we found is that across all the different personas, public sector staff are spending quite a lot of time working with data. So I think this might be cohort 2, but I think cohort 1 was about the same. So say about 50% of staff's time was spent working with data. I mean, there's lots of caveats. I mean, this is obviously a self-selecting group of people who have replied to a data maturity assessment, but it felt quite a high percentage of time people were spending working with data, and that's across all the different personas, from people who don't even think that they do anything with data. And I think the big takeaway from this was that people are spending quite a bit of time doing stuff with data, but are we really getting the value from that within organisations? So again, as part of the assessment, we were able to sort of show the areas where or the themes in the data orchard assessment where there was most room for improvement, and I think those were around tools, analysis and skills, and I think leadership also featured in quite a few of the organisations as areas for improvement. And I guess the right hand little one here is just showing you that sort of maturity score by persona. So again, when we looked into the details, there's maybe some differences in scores by personas as well. So in general, people who are maybe using data to make decisions are scoring a little bit more lowly than people who are maybe in the our data analysts or data professionals. So I mean, some of the key findings, I'm just going to pick out some of the highlights that we had. Lots of staff time spent working with data, around half their time, that the tools for collecting and storing data are much better than those that people have for analysing and reporting, that there's probably quite low levels of advanced analytical techniques being used across the organisations. There's maybe a little bit of a skills gap in organisations to kind of maximise that use of data. At the leadership level, while I think most agreed that data is a major kind of organisational priority, it felt like maybe there wasn't so much in the way of planning and investment sort of being recognised by people who were filling in the survey. And that data, like organisations might not know where their data assets are and who's responsible for them. And actually, I think the scoring wasn't great on confidence around the quality of their data as well. And then culturally, we could see a really strong thing here on security and protection of data. And that, you know, for some of those areas, the scores were really, really high. But actually what it was doing is it's hiding underneath that actually, while we're really good on security and protection, we score really badly on making data accessible to staff when they need it as well. And then I guess that leads us on to, you know, you've done your 6 month, you know, you've done the 6 month project, you've kind of done your ambition, you've thought about what you know, you've done your assessment and your workshops, and you've maybe started to think about your plan. So what we've also been doing is just thinking about, well, what are the next best actions? Like, what's the thing to do after you've done this? And these are just some ideas that we found from the cohort. So lots of them go on to do mapping their data assets, because lots of them, you know, maybe don't have that picture across their organization. Some do tool audits as well, so what sort of tools are available within their organization. Quite a few of them start looking at data governance and thinking about, like, how is your data managed within your organization. Some are doing data quality reviews, so using the ONS data quality framework as the basis for that. Some of the big ones are forming that little group. We've been calling it a data gang. So get your gang together and, you know, use that sort of group of people who are maybe spread out across the office to help you really talk about and sell the importance of data in your organization. And another big one that we're seeing quite a few of the cohort do is this test of change project. So, you know, finding an area from your data maturity assessments that are perhaps not scoring as highly, and speaking to them and finding out if there's a little pilot that you could do with them, and that could demonstrate the value of that data transformation more widely. And then by theme, I mean, we've got some other ideas. I mean, I mentioned some of the areas, the themes from Data Orchard, where we were maybe scoring low, you know, a little bit more lowly. And again, just some, you know, what we're seeing some of the organizations do in these areas. You know, so looking at skills that they've got in-house, you know, looking at some of the processes that they've got for, you know, kind of managing their data. I mean, some of the, I mean, I could talk about this forever, but some of the results were showing that one of the big things is the lack of automation. So people are spending lots of time getting data tidied and in a format that they can then use for doing analysis. So thinking about doing some of these kind of reproducible analytical pipelines to help improve that. And then just being able to talk about how important this is, and that test of change projects are really important as well. And that's me come to the end. So yeah, thanks very much. And I'm going to hand back over to Suzanne.
I'll come off mute there. Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. Honestly, I was inspired before. I am even more inspired now. These were both really fantastic presentations, and I'm sure others on the call are as well. So just before we take some questions, I'm going to very quickly, she says, hopefully, there we go, going to share this slide, and I'm going to go to the right slide. Just really to round off the session, I'm very conscious of time and I'm sure there are questions. So if you have got any, obviously you can start submitting them now. But I do just want to round off this session by talking about what this might mean for us here in Wales. As a data organisation, and particularly one that supports local authorities, the wider public sector to some extent, but certainly local authorities, we can very much see the benefits of an approach like Shona has talked about, where we look at data maturity across the whole of the local authority sector, I'd say, you know, from where we're coming at it from. The idea of being able to kind of understand the strengths, weaknesses, priorities for improvement, both within and across Welsh local authorities, I think is something that we're really kind of keen to be looking at, especially when it's based on a consistent methodology as been described. And it's something that we are really keen to explore with our local authorities in Wales. We are aware, of course, that there are a couple of other organisations, at least, that are working in this space at the minute. For instance, we know that our Social Care Wales colleagues are starting to look at data maturity within the social care sector. And our colleagues in the WRGA's digital team are also looking at digital maturity within organisations. And obviously there is a link there to the kind of data maturity. And obviously there are some of you out there on the call, I'm sure, who have yourselves already begun to think about data maturity. So obviously any future plans we have would involve making sure that our approaches are aligned with what is already going on in this space, because we know we certainly don't want to duplicate. But what we do think is that there is value in looking at data maturity in its own right and on a corporate organisational wide basis, as much as possible. So what are the next steps? How are we hoping to do, or how are we planning to take this forward? To some extent, it's up to you, our local authority colleagues. We are keen to understand whether there is an appetite for this kind of thing across Wales. Is it something you'd like us to explore further with yourselves? So, we're keen to hear your views today, but we aren't going to be just relying on this session to kind of pick this up. So it's worth us mentioning that we are about to embark on a fairly comprehensive engagement exercise with our local authority colleagues, starting with chief execs, but then undoubtedly widening that out to reach strategic data leads and possibly even operational data staff. And that's just to kind of understand more about your current approaches to data, your strengths and weaknesses as a starter for some of these discussions. There are many reasons why now is a good time for us to be picking this up. Obviously, today's session is not really about that. So we will be publishing a blog quite shortly that will give you more information than I can obviously fit into today's session. But to bring it back to data maturity specifically, in parallel with the engagement that I've talked about, where we will also obviously talk about kind of people's views around data maturity, we are also going to be establishing a strategic data leads network and a local authority data analysts and researchers network. And these networks will, among other things, explore with us the idea of a national approach to understanding data maturity. So there are already plans in place for how we want and will be taking this forward with yourselves. And obviously, for those of you that aren't from a local authority, then please feel free to get in touch, because we can certainly help point you in the right direction if this is something that you are equally interested in looking at. So that's all from me as well for today. So if there are any questions, then please roll them out now. We have one question, which is excellent. So if there's no formal data leadership, what would you suggest is the best way of rolling out a data maturity assessment? Matt and Shona, do either of you want to jump in on that one?
I mean, I can give you it's maybe just a extension of what I said already, and that's find your little group of people within your organisation. I think most of the cohort found that like really, really important to do, and I guess there's lots of different ways that you can do that. You can, it can be a little core team of people who are really interested in data. It can be a broader kind of advisory group that pulls in people from across wider, more widely across the organisation and brings in comms and things. Or like some of them just simply took an existing leadership group and said, right, you're going to be responsible for this as well. So I guess there's lots of different ways to do it, but find that little group of people. Don't think you can do this by yourself. What we've sort of been suggesting people to do, and I can share this with this Suzanne separately, is we did a little bit of persona work. So we had a set of personas that were about like data improvement projects, and there's like 5 personas there, and we sort of said, find those people. These are your change agents within your organization, right? So find these people and get them to help you, because they're all going to be enthusiastic. So yeah, I think you can still do it without having formal data leadership. A lot of the organizations in the cohorts didn't have a responsible person for data. They're probably getting to that point now, but this really helped that conversation and why it was needed. So I hope that helps.
Matt, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, and I really echo all of that, and it is about, I think, finding your allies. And as Sean said, it is a relatively new thing for a lot of organizations to even have a person who's responsible for data. It is, for most organizations, it's sort of became part of people's roles and naturally evolved into it. But it sounds like you are one of the agents for change and one of the passionate people in your organisation. I think it is a case of finding the people who are similarly minded, and then also engaging with the people who perhaps are in leadership positions who don't see themselves as data people, despite the fact that actually data is a massive part of their role, and begin convincing them that actually this is something really valuable in a space that you can step into together. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think from our point of view, part of what we're hoping that the engagement exercise might drive, and again, largely for local authorities, I'm afraid, but just by us starting to have those conversations with the leadership, will in those instances perhaps where we don't have such well-defined roles like that yet, just by us starting to have the conversations might encourage people to think, oh, maybe we do need to have those roles. Maybe that's a bit grand of us to think that, but I think there's certainly something there. And you've both talked about just putting data on the agenda has a really, really big impact on kind of how we can take some of this work forward. And yeah, we have very much somebody there being very happy to be called an agent of change in a data gang. So we've got loads and loads of new terminology now that we're all going to be using. Are there any other questions from anybody on the call that you'd like to raise? Just give it another minute or so. I usually start talking and rounding up and saying goodbye, and then questions come in. Everybody is stunned into silence, but I'm sure genuinely that they were as inspired as I was and as impressed by your presentations and just really keen to get moving on something now. They were truly excellent presentations. So thank you very much to both Matt and Shona for joining us today and talking about their experiences. I think it's going to be invaluable, especially for us and you, as hopefully we move forward with this together. I'm sure I'll be back in touch with both of you, just seeking advice and guidance and help. But for now, it's just to say thank you ever so much to both of you for joining us today. Thank you to you all for joining with us. And I will stop the recording and say goodbye and thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much.